What if your villain was more compelling than your hero ever could be? Have you ever felt a story's darkness speaking louder than its light? Today we unlock secrets behind unforgettable fantasy villains in storytelling history itself. A strong villain can elevate entire worlds and reshape reader emotions deeply. Without a powerful antagonist, even great heroes feel strangely hollow inside instantly. Why do some villains stay forever etched in our memories so deeply? What hidden ingredients make a villain truly unforgettable and terrifying indeed ever? Fantasy worlds depend heavily on antagonists with depth and emotional weight always. A villain without motivation becomes forgettable, no matter how powerful they seem. Imagine a villain whose pain mirrors the hero's own darkest fears deeply. That emotional complexity transforms stories into unforgettable, epic fantasy journeys forever lasting. Great villains challenge heroes in ways physical strength alone cannot completely ever. Every legendary antagonist begins with a deeply human flaw inside themselves always. Readers remember villains who force them to question morality itself, deeply truly. What if your villain believes they are the true hero all along? Such perspective shifts make fantasy stories richer and emotionally gripping always far. A well-written villain reflects society's fears and hidden truths within us all. Their presence should create tension every time they appear on screen now. Villains become iconic when readers understand their tragic backstory clearly, fully, eventually. The best antagonists are never purely evil or completely good either truly. They exist in moral gray areas that challenge readers deeply emotionally always. A compelling villain forces the hero's growth through constant struggle within. Without opposition, even the strongest hero's journey loses meaning entirely quickly instantly. Villains often reveal the darkest aspects of human nature itself, clearly always. Their ideology shapes the entire conflict in powerful ways, indeed, always forever. Every fantasy villain should challenge the hero's beliefs directly without hesitation always. Fear alone does not make a villain memorable enough truly lasting ever. True villains make audiences question their own moral choices deeply constantly always. A villain's presence should feel inevitable and unstoppable, always completely truly forever. They are mirrors reflecting what heroes fear becoming someday deeply inside themselves. A strong antagonist transforms a simple story into epic fantasy, legendary tale. Without emotional depth, villains become forgettable shadows in history itself, quickly always. Their goals must feel understandable, even if morally wrong deeply, sometimes clearly. Readers connect with villains who suffer relatable struggles deeply inside themselves always. A villain's power should symbolize their emotional pain deeply within themselves always. Great villains often believe they are saving the world entirely truly itself. Their charisma can sometimes overshadow the hero's journey, completely deeply always indeed. A villain without purpose is just chaos without meaning, truly empty always. Memorable antagonists evolve alongside the hero throughout the story deeply meaningfully always. Their introduction should immediately raise tension and curiosity, instantly, deeply, always, truly. Villains become legendary when their motives feel painfully real, deeply human, always. A strong antagonist is not born evil, but shaped deeply over time, always. Their emotional journey is just as important as the hero's own story. Every villain hides a broken truth behind their actions, deeply personal always. The best villains make heroes question their own identity deeply, constantly always. Villains often believe destruction is the only salvation truly possible within themselves. Their complexity defines how unforgettable they become deeply human, always truly forever. Even the hero's victory should come with emotional cost deeply felt always. A villain's ideology often shapes the entire fantasy world, deeply itself always. Readers remember feelings more than actions in storytelling, deeply always, indeed truly. A powerful antagonist is both feared and understood, deeply truly, always indeed. Their backstory should explain their descent into darkness, deeply tragically, always truly. Villains challenge heroes to grow beyond their limitations, deeply constantly, always truly. The strongest antagonists leave lasting emotional impact on readers deeply forever always. Villains are not obstacles, but essential storytelling forces, deeply powerful, always truly. Now let's dive deeper into crafting a villain that truly feels alive. Every memorable antagonist begins with a clear and powerful emotional foundation first. Without emotional depth, your villain becomes flat and instantly forgettable in stories. Think about villains who made you feel fear and sympathy simultaneously before. Those characters were written with intention, not random acts of evil alone. A strong villain always has a reason driving their darkest decisions forward. That reason must feel believable, even if it is morally disturbing deeply. Imagine a ruler who destroys kingdoms, believing it prevents greater suffering later. That belief instantly adds complexity and emotional weight to their actions always. Real-life history also shows leaders who thought destruction was necessary for peace. Fantasy villains often mirror these real-world moral contradictions in powerful storytelling ways. When readers recognize truth in fiction, emotional engagement becomes much stronger instantly. Your villain should never exist just to oppose the hero blindly ever. Instead, they must believe their path is the correct one entirely truly. This creates tension because both hero and villain seem justified somehow always. A great example is a villain who lost everything due to injustice. That trauma can shape them into someone seeking control over chaos itself. Their pain becomes fuel for decisions that reshape entire fantasy worlds completely. Readers begin questioning whether they would act differently in similar pain. That emotional connection is what separates average villains from legendary ones always. Even powerful villains should show vulnerability in unexpected subtle moments sometimes. A crack in their armor makes them more human and relatable deeply. Imagine a dark sorcerer who secretly mourns lost loved ones every night. That contrast between power and pain makes characters unforgettable in storytelling always. Villains become interesting when their past directly shapes present motivations clearly always. Every scar, betrayal, or failure should influence their current decisions deeply indeed. Without a strong backstory, even powerful villains feel emotionally empty quickly always. Storytelling becomes richer when villains are given meaningful emotional journeys too. Think of villains not as enemies, but as broken protagonists themselves often. This perspective shift completely changes how you write and develop them fully. A well-written villain often feels like a hero in their own story. That belief makes their actions feel justified from their unique perspective always. Readers should understand their logic even if they strongly disagree with it. When motivation is clear, emotional conflict becomes far more engaging instantly always. A villain who wants to save the world through destruction feels terrifying because their logic is twisted yet still understandable on some level always. Great villains often reflect fears that exist within society itself, deeply always. They become symbolic representations of human struggle and moral complexity, truly always. A fantasy villain should challenge not just heroes, but also audience beliefs. This makes storytelling immersive and emotionally impactful for every reader involved. Even dialogue can reveal hidden layers of a villain's personality deeply always. Small moments of hesitation or regret make villains more realistic instantly always. Without such moments, they risk becoming one-dimensional and predictable quickly always. A strong antagonist evolves over time, just like the hero does always. Their transformation should feel natural and emotionally driven throughout the story. Readers should witness how circumstances gradually shape their darker worldview completely. That evolution creates a powerful emotional arc for the antagonist too always. Even silence from a villain can carry deep emotional meaning, sometimes always. Every action should feel intentional rather than random or forced storytelling. A meaningful villain strengthens every scene they appear in consistently always. Their presence should instantly raise stakes and emotional tension dramatically always. Think of them as forces of change within your story world. They push heroes beyond comfort zones into growth and transformation always deeply. Without them, heroes rarely reach their full potential in narratives truly. That is why villains are essential to every great fantasy story. They are not just obstacles, but catalysts for emotional storytelling growth. A well-crafted villain makes the entire story unforgettable and powerful always. Their influence should linger in readers' minds long after the final page. Now everything you know about writing villains is about to shift dramatically. What if the villain is not actually the antagonist of the story? This twist changes how we perceive morality in fantasy storytelling completely. Sometimes, the so-called villain is simply the protagonist of another perspective. Every hero believes they are saving the world from destruction always. But villains often believe the exact same thing from opposite sides. This creates a powerful moral mirror between hero and antagonist roles. Suddenly, the story is no longer about good versus evil clearly. It becomes about competing truths shaped by different life experiences deeply. Imagine a villain fighting to prevent a prophecy of global collapse. Their actions seem cruel, but their intentions feel strangely protective always. That contradiction is what makes fantasy storytelling so emotionally powerful always. A true twist villain forces readers to question their assumptions constantly. What if the hero is unknowingly causing greater destruction overall instead? This idea reshapes the entire structure of traditional fantasy narratives instantly. The villain then becomes the one trying to correct imbalance always. Readers start questioning who truly deserves the title of hero. This emotional confusion keeps audiences deeply engaged throughout the story always. A powerful antagonist should challenge the hero's moral certainty completely. Without certainty, both sides become equally compelling and dangerous simultaneously always. This is where storytelling becomes truly unpredictable and thought-provoking deeply always. A villain's truth should feel equally valid as the hero's truth. That balance creates tension that lasts until the final moment always. Imagine discovering your villain is actually saving lives through destruction. That revelation changes everything the audience believed about the story completely. A twist like this redefines emotional loyalty within the narrative instantly. Suddenly, hatred turns into understanding and confusion simultaneously for readers. This emotional shift is what makes villains unforgettable in fantasy stories. A great antagonist should never be fully exposed too early ever. Mystery allows audiences to question motives and build deeper connections always. When truth is revealed slowly, emotional impact becomes far stronger always. Villains become tragic figures when their intentions are finally understood deeply. A tragedy is what gives fantasy stories emotional weight always. A twist villain often believes they are preventing a greater catastrophe. Their methods may be extreme, but their logic feels consistent always. This creates an uncomfortable realization for both hero and audience alike. Sometimes, heroes must destroy what villains are desperately trying to protect. This reversal completely changes traditional storytelling expectations in fantasy genres. A villain's downfall may actually be the world's salvation or doom. That uncertainty keeps readers emotionally invested until the final resolution always. Great storytelling thrives on blurred moral boundaries between characters deeply always. The best villains challenge emotional comfort zones of every reader. When perspective shifts, sympathy for villains grows unexpectedly stronger always. Even their darkest actions start making painful sense over time. This emotional complexity defines legendary fantasy antagonists throughout literature history. A twist villain is not revealed, but slowly understood instead. Understanding replaces judgment as the story unfolds gradually and carefully. Readers begin to feel conflicted about who truly deserves victory. The conflict is the heart of powerful fantasy storytelling always. A villain's truth can be more heartbreaking than their actions. Their motivations often come from loss, fear, or desperation deeply. This emotional core makes them feel painfully human and relatable always. A well-written twist forces readers to rethink earlier story events. Suddenly, every action carries new meaning after revelation is revealed. This is how great villains transform entire narratives completely forever. The story becomes richer when nothing is purely black or white. Moral ambiguity is what separates good writing from unforgettable storytelling, always. Villains thrive in this gray space between right and wrong. That space is where the most powerful stories are born always. Next, we will craft how to conclude your villain's unforgettable journey. Now we arrive at the moment where your villain becomes truly unforgettable forever. A great antagonist must leave a lasting emotional scar on the story. Their presence should echo even after they disappear from the narrative completely. Readers should remember them not just as evil, but deeply human always. The final impact of a villain depends on emotional resolution carefully crafted. Every action they took should lead toward a meaningful narrative consequence, always. Without consequence, even the strongest villain feels meaningless in the end. Think about how their journey reshaped both hero and entire world. A powerful villain changes everything they touch within the story universe. Their downfall should feel inevitable, yet emotionally heartbreaking at the same time. This balance creates unforgettable endings in fantasy storytelling history always. A villain's final moment should reflect their deepest belief or fear. That reflection gives closure while still leaving emotional questions unanswered subtly. Great villains do not simply lose. They are understood in defeat. Even in failure, they should feel significant and meaningful always. Their ideology should survive, even if their physical form does not. That lingering idea becomes part of the story's emotional legacy forever. Readers should feel conflicted when the villain finally meets their end. Relief and sadness should exist together in that final moment. This emotional duality is what makes villains truly memorable always. A weak villain disappears, but a strong one stays in memory. Their story should influence how readers view future narratives deeply always. Every fantasy world is shaped by its greatest antagonists, significantly always. A villain's final choice often defines their entire legacy completely. That choice should feel consistent with everything they believed earlier. Even destruction can feel meaningful when rooted in emotional truth. The best endings do not erase villains, they explain them deeply. A powerful antagonist often leaves behind lessons for both hero and reader. Those lessons continue shaping the emotional core of the story. Villains become unforgettable when their influence outlives their presence always. Think about how their ideology changes the hero permanently forever. That transformation is the real victory hidden inside the story. A villain's defeat should never feel like simple celebration alone. It should feel like the end of something deeply meaningful always. Great storytelling makes even victory feel emotionally complicated and heavy. This emotional weight defines powerful fantasy narratives across generations always. A villain should never be forgotten after the final chapter ends. Their memory should linger like a shadow over the story world. That lingering presence proves they were written with true depth. Readers often remember villains more than heroes in strong stories, because villains challenge emotions in ways heroes rarely can fully. Their impact reshapes how audiences understand conflict and morality always. A strong antagonist becomes a symbol of emotional storytelling power. Even silence after their defeat should feel meaningful and heavy. That silence represents everything they once stood for deeply always. A well-written villain transforms endings into emotional experiences rather than conclusions. Their legacy should inspire reflection long after the story ends. Readers should question whether the world is truly better without them. That uncertainty is what makes villains truly unforgettable forever always. A great antagonist is never fully defeated in emotional memory. They continue existing within the moral questions they left behind. This is how fantasy villains achieve timeless storytelling significance always. Their journey becomes part of the reader's emotional understanding of fiction. A powerful ending gives meaning to everything the villain represented. Without that meaning, even epic stories feel incomplete and hollow. So every villain deserves a thoughtful and emotional conclusion always. One that honors their complexity and emotional journey fully always. That is how legends are born in fantasy storytelling forever. And that is how villains become unforgettable across generations of readers. Next, we will finish by mastering your villain's ultimate creation. Now we bring everything together to create a truly legendary fantasy villain. A memorable antagonist is never built by accident, but by intention. Every detail must serve their emotional depth, motivation, and narrative role. Think of your villain as the emotional engine of the entire story. Without them, the hero's journey loses tension, meaning, and direction completely. A great villain always begins with a powerful, personal, relatable wound. That wound shapes their beliefs, choices, and actions throughout the story. You must ask what broke them before they became who they are. That question is the foundation of every unforgettable antagonist ever written. Their ideology should feel like a logical response to their suffering. Even if it leads to destruction, readers must understand its origin clearly. A strong villain never acts randomly but always with emotional purpose. Their actions should feel like consequences of a deeply flawed worldview. This makes them feel real, grounded, and disturbingly believable in fantasy. Remember, fear alone does not create a lasting, memorable antagonist, ever. Emotion, motivation, and ideology are what truly define their strength always. Your villain should challenge both the hero and the audience equally. They should force uncomfortable questions about justice, morality, and truth. A powerful antagonist reshapes how readers interpret every event in story. Their presence should raise stakes every time they appear on page. Even silence from them should feel heavy and full of meaning. That emotional pressure is what separates average villains from iconic ones. A legendary villain often reflects humanity's deepest fears and contradictions. They become symbols of what happens when pain is left unresolved. Readers should feel both resistance and understanding toward their journey. That emotional conflict is what makes storytelling deeply immersive always. A great antagonist is not defeated easily, nor forgotten quickly either. Their impact should linger like a scar on the narrative world. Even after defeat, their ideology should continue influencing characters and events. This lingering influence keeps your story alive in readers' minds forever. A strong villain often feels like the hero of their own story. That perspective shift is what makes them dangerously compelling always. You must write them with respect for their emotional truth always. Even when they are wrong, their logic must feel painfully understandable. That complexity is what elevates fantasy storytelling to higher levels. Avoid making villains purely evil without reason or emotional foundation ever. Instead, build them through loss, fear, ambition, or broken hope. These elements make their downfall far more meaningful and tragic always. A well-written villain transforms the hero's journey into something greater. They are the force that shapes growth, struggle, and transformation deeply. Without them, heroes remain unchanged and emotionally incomplete in story. Every great fantasy narrative depends on this balance between forces. Your villain should always feel essential, not optional to the plot. They are not just obstacles, but emotional mirrors of the hero. This mirror reveals hidden truths about both characters simultaneously always. When done right, your villain becomes the most remembered character. Even more than the hero, they can define the entire story. That is the true power of a well-crafted antagonist always. So build them carefully, layer by layer, with emotional precision always. Let their pain, belief, and vision guide every decision they make. And ensure their presence transforms the entire world around them deeply. A legendary villain does not just exist. They redefine storytelling itself. They leave behind questions, emotions, and unforgettable narrative echoes forever. That is how you create a villain who becomes timeless in fantasy, not by making them louder, but by making them deeply human. Because humanity, even in darkness, is what audiences never forget. And that is the ultimate secret to a memorable antagonist always. One who challenges heroes, changes worlds, and lingers in memory forever. Now you hold the blueprint for creating truly iconic fantasy villains. Use it wisely, and your stories will never be forgotten again.